When most people hear Egyptian hieroglyphs, they imagine mysterious symbols carved into stone, maybe decorative, maybe magical, maybe impossible to read. But hieroglyphs were not a code made to stay hidden. They were a full writing system used to record language, memory, religion, authority, and identity over an enormous span of time. In practical terms, this means hieroglyphs had to do everything a script must do: name people, describe actions, preserve ritual formulas, mark ownership, and communicate complex ideas precisely enough that later readers could understand them. What made hieroglyphs extraordinary is that they did this through a layered system that mixed visual and phonetic logic. A sign could act as an image of a thing, a sign for a word, a sound value, or a classifier that clarified meaning. So instead of being primitive pictures before real writing, hieroglyphs represent an advanced solution to the core challenge of writing itself, turning speech and thought into stable marks that outlive the speaker. To understand why hieroglyphs still matter today, we need to move past the myth of mystery and look at them as a functioning technology of language. The structure of hieroglyphic writing is one reason it fascinates linguists and historians. It did not rely on just one strategy. It combined ideographic, logographic, syllabic, and alphabetic elements in the same system. That sounds technical, but the core idea is simple: one script using multiple tools. Some signs represented ideas or objects directly. Some represented whole words. Others captured sound values, including consonantal patterns that could be combined to write names and grammatical forms. And then there were determinatives, signs that often were not pronounced but helped readers distinguish categories of meaning, like whether a word referred to a person, place, action, or abstract concept. This is crucial because it shows hieroglyphs were optimized for readability in context, not just one-to-one sound transcription. Over time, the sign inventory became very large, with more than 1,000 distinct characters attested across periods, while around 900 signs were in use in the mature Middle Kingdom tradition. A system of that scale requires training, conventions, and professional literacy. In other words, hieroglyphic writing was never random art. It was standardized enough to sustain administration, religion, and cultural continuity across centuries. Hieroglyphs emerged from earlier proto-literate symbol practices in the late 4th millennium BCE, often associated with the Naqada III phase. By the early dynastic era, we begin to see fully decipherable Egyptian sentences. This transition matters because it marks the shift from symbolic marking to true writing, from signs that merely identify goods or ritual associations to signs that encode language in grammatical sequence. Once that threshold is crossed, a civilization can preserve far richer information, narrative, law-like formulae, liturgy, royal claims, historical memory, and technical instruction. Egyptian writing then matured alongside state formation. As political institutions centralized, the need for repeatable records and formal inscriptions increased. Hieroglyphs became embedded in the visual language of power, kingship, temples, monuments, tombs, and offerings. But this was not only propaganda. The system also anchored religious continuity by preserving canonical texts and ritual speech believed to be effective when properly written and recited. So from very early on, hieroglyphs were both administrative infrastructure and metaphysical instrument. Their development reflects a civilization learning how to stabilize meaning across time, space, and changing generations of readers. As Egyptian civilization expanded and transformed, hieroglyphic writing proved remarkably durable. It was used through the Old and Middle Kingdoms, the New Kingdom, and later periods under Persian and Ptolemaic rule, with survivals even into Roman Egypt. That longevity, measured in millennia, not centuries, is almost impossible to overstate. Few writing traditions remain culturally central for so long while still adapting to new political regimes and social realities. One reason for this endurance is that hieroglyphs occupied a high-status formal domain, especially monumental and sacred contexts, where continuity itself was a value. Writing in inherited forms connected rulers and institutions to ancestral legitimacy. At the same time, practical needs pushed adaptation. Scribal culture maintained conventions while allowing evolution in sign usage, orthography, and style. The result is a script that remained recognizable yet historically dynamic. When we encounter hieroglyphs on a temple facade from a late period, we are seeing not a frozen relic but a living tradition consciously preserving antiquity while still functioning in its own present. This dual identity, conservative and adaptive at once, helps explain how hieroglyphs could survive dramatic shifts in empire, language environment, and religious competition. A key part of that adaptability was the development of related cursive scripts. Monumental hieroglyphs were visually complex and often labor-intensive, especially on stone. For faster writing on papyrus, wood, and administrative media, Egyptians used cursive hieroglyphic forms in religious manuscripts and, over time, increasingly relied on derivative scripts such as hieratic and later demotic. These were not unrelated inventions, they grew from the hieroglyphic system, preserving deep structural ties while streamlining execution for different tasks. Think of it as script ecology, one prestigious formal script and other faster scripts optimized for everyday or specialized use. This matters because it overturns the false image of ancient writing as static. Egyptian literacy involved multiple registers, materials, and calligraphic habits, each linked to context and purpose. A temple wall, a funerary papyrus, and an administrative record did not need identical visual form to belong to the same broader writing tradition. In fact, the coexistence of these forms probably strengthened the system by balancing ceremonial continuity with practical flexibility. The civilization could honor sacred visual tradition while still running the paperwork of real life. Now comes one of the biggest historical consequences. Egyptian scripts helped seed later alphabetic traditions. Through developmental pathways that include Proto-Sinaitic and Phoenician, and then branches through Greek and Aramaic, the legacy of Egyptian writing reaches into many scripts used today. This does not mean modern alphabets are simply hieroglyphs in disguise. The transformations were profound, involving simplification, reanalysis of signs as primarily phonetic units, and adaptation to different languages. But the genealogical thread matters. If Phoenician became the first widely adopted phonetic writing system in its region, and Greek and Aramaic spread from it, then the downstream impact includes Latin and Cyrillic via Greek, and Arabic and many Brahmic scripts via Aramaic-linked traditions. So when we write with letters on a keyboard, we are participating in a very long historical chain in which Egyptian experimentation with sign and sound sits near the beginning. The familiar alphabetic idea, that a compact set of signs can encode language phonetically at scale, did not emerge in a vacuum. Its deep prehistory passes through Egypt's scribal world. Scholars often describe hieroglyphs as one of a small number of writing systems developed independently, alongside cuneiform, Chinese characters, and Mayan script. Whether we focus on strict independence criteria or broader contact debates, the core point remains powerful: writing has been invented only a few times in human history. Most scripts descend from earlier scripts. That makes each primary center of invention a civilizational turning point. In Egypt, the invention and refinement of writing enabled institutions to scale, rituals to standardize, and memory to become less dependent on oral transmission alone. It also allowed social specialization. Scribes were not merely copyists, they were custodians of an intellectual infrastructure that linked governance, economy, religion, and education. Their training transformed visual marks into actionable knowledge. Seen this way, hieroglyphs are not just an artistic heritage but evidence of an epistemic revolution, a society constructing durable external memory. The fact that this system remained productive for thousands of years shows how robust that revolution was. Writing did not just serve the Egyptian state, it helped produce the kind of state and culture that could persist, reinterpret itself, and project authority across deep time. Despite this long success, hieroglyphic literacy eventually collapsed. In late antiquity, especially after the closure of pagan temples in Roman Egypt, the institutional environments that sustained fluent reading and writing in hieroglyphs were dismantled. Scripts do not survive on beauty alone, they require communities of practice, teaching chains, and social functions that justify the effort of mastery. When temples lost operational continuity, the scribal pipeline broke. Over generations, fluency disappeared. This is a dramatic reminder that literacy can vanish when institutions fail, even after millennia of continuity. The symbols remained visible on monuments, but their linguistic mechanism became opaque. People could still see the signs, yet could no longer access the language encoded within them. At that point, hieroglyphs shifted from living script to enigmatic artifact. The loss was not only philological. It severed direct access to huge bodies of historical and religious text, forcing later societies to interpret Egypt through fragments, myths, and external accounts. Cultural memory persisted, but textual self-voice was muted until modern decipherment reopened the archive. For centuries after that break, hieroglyphs attracted intense fascination. Medieval and early modern scholars, spiritual interpreters, and treasure seekers all tried to decode them. Some approaches treated the signs as purely symbolic emblems of hidden wisdom rather than a language system, which led to imaginative but inaccurate readings. Yet fascination itself mattered because it preserved attention and motivated collection, comparison, and debate. Crucially, the continued presence of Coptic, an Egyptian language stage written with a largely Greek-derived alphabet, provided a potential bridge for phonetic understanding, even if the bridge was not immediately crossed successfully. The long prehistory of failed or partial decipherment teaches an important methodological lesson. Without the right bilingual evidence and a sound linguistic framework, even brilliant observers can misread a script for generations. Mystery was not caused by lack of intelligence, it was caused by missing keys and wrong assumptions. The eventual breakthrough required moving from symbolic speculation to disciplined analysis of recurring sign patterns, names, and multilingual correspondences. In that sense, the story of decipherment is also the story of modern historical linguistics finding its footing. The decisive breakthrough came in the 1820s with Jean-François Champollion, working from the Rosetta Stone and related materials. The Rosetta inscription presented parallel texts in different scripts, enabling controlled comparison. Earlier work had already highlighted key clues, especially around royal names in cartouches, but Champollion pushed further by demonstrating that hieroglyphic writing could represent phonetic values systematically, not just symbolic meanings. This was the turning point. Once signs were understood as participating in a language encoding system with phonetic components, large portions of the script became tractable. Decipherment did not happen in one magical moment, it unfolded through testing, correction, and expansion. But the conceptual barrier was broken. Hieroglyphs were restored to readability, and with that restoration came direct access to Egyptian voices across dynasties and genres. In historical terms, this is comparable to reopening a sealed library spanning thousands of years. Texts once admired only as visual relics became readable documents of politics, devotion, anxiety, ambition, law-like order, and afterlife imagination. Decipherment transformed Egyptology from artifact interpretation into text-grounded civilization study. How much text are we talking about? Estimates for the surviving ancient Egyptian corpus, across hieroglyphic and hieratic sources, reach into the millions of words, and when duplicate textual traditions are counted separately, the scale can approach around 10 million word instances. Massive lexicographic projects such as the Wörterbuch Ägyptischen Sprache, containing roughly 1.5 to 1.7 million words, reflect the depth and complexity of the evidence-based scholars had to organize. These numbers matter because they shatter the idea that hieroglyphic culture is represented by a handful of famous inscriptions. We are dealing with a substantial textual civilization. Large corpora allow pattern analysis, changes in vocabulary, shifts in formulae, regional variations, theological evolution, administrative habits, and genre conventions over time. They also expose the diversity of Egyptian writing beyond monumental clichés. Even when preservation is uneven, the corpus is rich enough to support nuanced historical reconstruction rather than simple stereotype. In practical terms, decipherment did not just translate isolated phrases, it enabled the long-term study of a language community across centuries, giving us access to continuity and change at a civilizational scale. So why does this matter now, beyond historical curiosity? Because hieroglyphs force us to rethink what writing is and what it does. They show that scripts are not neutral containers, they are cultural architectures shaped by religion, power, memory, and material constraints. They show that visual richness and phonetic precision can coexist. They show that literacy depends on institutions, and that institutional collapse can erase reading competence even when texts physically survive. They also remind us that modern writing systems are deeply interconnected through long chains of adaptation, with Egyptian innovation near a foundational branch point. In a digital age obsessed with speed and simplification, hieroglyphs offer a counterlesson. Durable communication can be multi-layered, context-sensitive, and aesthetically charged without losing functional rigor. Their legacy is not just in museums or documentaries. It is present every time we trust marks to carry meaning across distance and time. The story of hieroglyphs is, in that sense, a story about us, how humans build memory outside the body, how we inherit systems we did not invent, and how the symbols we use quietly shape the worlds we can imagine. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.